I am a married woman of 30 years of age. I want to discuss about family problems that I have had since I was a little child. My past is a little complicated and takes a long time to understand. First of all, I recall feeling like the family's troublemaker all the time. In contrast, Catherine, my older sister, was our family's perpetual golden child. She looks a lot like our mother, with blue eyes and blonde hair. My great-grandmother on my father's side, on the other hand, gave me brown eyes and brown hair. As you can see, I am the only non-blonde person. Despite coming from a four-person family, I felt isolated rather than at ease during my early years. At times, my parents even emphasized this emotion. To check whether I was indeed their child, for example, they made a joke about taking a DNA test. It seemed as if they were saying that it was very okay to make jokes about it with a small child. They brushed it off as a joke, but it was clear who they preferred. Catherine received the same treatment as a cute, ideal angel. I felt like an extraneous member of the family in contrast. I understood at an early age that there were things I would never be able to do. I was almost alone and never received the same love and support that Catherine did. My predicament only got worse when I started high school. Catherine's prominence and beauty made my parents proud, and they appeared content with that. In the meanwhile, I had to fend for myself. I developed from accepting that I didn't need to concentrate on forging close ties with my family. Smoldering hatred toward our parents for spoiling Catherine and ignoring me was more prevalent than rage towards Catherine herself. I made going to college my life's ambition as a result. My belief was that attending college would release me from the authority of my parents. That day was something I looked forward to, but reality was not so pleasant. I had to commute from home in order to save money because I was unable to live independently due to financial difficulties. It was oppressive to live at home, and my mother would constantly remind me of how much my parents sacrificed for me, as though I had other choices. I became even more frustrated. I eventually got a decent job and was able to move out, but the strain I had been under up until then persisted. Then, I married Jason 3 years ago, which allowed me to finally break with my family. In sharp contrast to my own ideas, I quickly discovered that my husband and his family placed a strong priority on family relationships. Jason and his family continued to emphasize that, despite their imperfections, family is family. I was therefore forced to agree with their opinions. Despite the fact that my parents didn't really value or care for me, this prompted me to begin providing them with monthly financial support. I kept on because I felt bad. Catherine, meantime, had been married to a rich man for several years and was still living a life in which she had all she needed. I was reminded by this fact that she had always been the family's special member. Her spouse was reportedly quite good to her, I had heard. I wasn't overly shocked to learn that, within a year of being married, Catherine had an affair with an unidentified man. But instead of ignoring it, her spouse filed for divorce a few months ago. Because the affair was the reason for the divorce, he shrewdly negotiated a settlement that left Catherine with virtually little. Since then, my mom has been trying to help Catherine and has been pleading with me to help her share the load. To get over her post-divorce depression, she asked me to join her on a trip. I declined, of course. Her tendency to blame others for her errors was incomprehensible to me. I have put a lot of effort into creating my own life, after all. But my husband, Jason, thought otherwise. It appears that he has affection for Catherine. She has always been gorgeous, and Jason always treated her with ease while we were at my parents' place. There were several disagreements as a result of Jason dismissing my discomfort as merely being concerned. Then, only a month ago, I learned that Catherine had taken a restorative trip. That's when I had an unfathomable shock. I was aware that our parents and Catherine were not wealthy enough. I wanted to think differently, but I had a sneaking suspicion that someone had been providing for her. But I was unable to get rid of my uneasiness, so I kept a close eye on everything. I once unintentionally overheard Jason and my mother conversing on the phone. I could grasp the scenario even if I couldn't hear the full talk completely. Without telling me, Jason had been giving Catherine financial assistance. Isn't it amazing that he accomplished this without talking to me? Would you believe this betrayal? Words cannot adequately convey the depth of the betrayal I experienced. In addition to ignoring my emotions, he went against what I wanted from someone who has never treated me with respect. I was so angry that I waited a few days to cool off before I made the decision to face him. I had hoped he would act more responsibly. He is, after all, my spouse. His response, however, was a pretext. Your mother strongly asked me to help. Basically, he couldn't say no to my mother's request, so he ended up paying for my sister's vacation. His typical justification, that families support one another, was added. He never betrayed my confidence in this way, which surprised me. It really hurt me. Even if I disagreed, he should at least have told me the truth about his choice. However, it appeared like he didn't want to tell me until I did. I was therefore aloof toward him for a while. I was really upset in what he did. He seemed to respect me as a wife and partner, but I couldn't be sure. Even though I was really offended that he ignored me, I reasoned that keeping my distance would only make things worse. Jason uses his phone a lot, and I've noticed this lately. He appears cautious and is usually carrying his phone. He communicates just when it's absolutely essential and acts as though I'm not interested in him, maybe supposing that I haven't observed anything. However, I'm not that unaware. The last time I saw him on the phone, it was Catherine, not my mother, who he was chatting to. I just heard a portion of their chat, but it didn't feel like the typical in-law exchanges. Although I won't go into specifics, I could hear my husband and her having a phone argument, and their tone of voice seemed more personal than the typical in-law's distance. Consequently, things began to gradually alter. His empathy for her, and the fact that he prioritized my family's ideas over my own, seemed completely out of character. I started to sense that there was more going on than I knew. He is abnormally interested in my sister. He's grown more understanding of her than ever before. Everything makes clear now. Everything seems consistent to me, even if I lack hard evidence. Without alerting Jason or anybody else, I made the decision to get legal counsel from a reputable attorney because I felt that I could no longer leave things as they were. I wanted to work through the issue at my own speed, and I was willing to tell everything since I thought my lawyer would help. When it came, I was prepared. Jason was asked to join my parents and Catherine for dinner. My lawyer's presence helped me maintain my composure. As usual, my parents and Catherine appeared to be having a good time, or perhaps they assumed I was merely a whimsy inviting people together for a good time. Jason, on the other hand, was visibly stressed. He had most likely already foreseen my next move. Sincerely, he was the family's most intelligent and quick to pick up on any warning. Looking directly into Jason's eyes, I brought up Catherine's vacation after dinner. I asked Catherine how she was able to afford it. After a few minutes of joyful laughter with her, my folks suddenly grew silent. I looked at Jason, who seemed even more anxious, and sarcastically remarked, "What do you think?" There was something between him and Catherine, so I asked him the genuine question. He attempted to sidestep the topic by claiming that family influence had skewed his judgment, but he still appeared astonished. According to my folks, I was overreacting, and he was only being polite. Catherine, meantime, accused me of being incredibly naive and deluded. However, I had no intention of giving up. My attorney took over and made it plain that I was not going to back down. I could see by their angry responses that they were violating my confidence. My parents may have been more uneasy since they had not expected the lawyer to be there. My parents attempted to get me to take back what I had said by claiming that they were only being kind, but I urged them to stop attempting to control me and to stop standing up for my sister, who has never treated me with dignity. I declared that I could not stand to be viewed as the victim of the family any longer. In response to Jason's attempt to claim, "We're just helping because we're family," I said, "You truly don't understand me if you are unable to comprehend the reasons behind my pain. At least I'm not stupid enough to ignore what's happening." I informed them that I was presently weighing my choices and that I would no longer be subjected to such manipulation. I'm taking precautions to protect myself, but he should remain with my family if he wants to defend them and make me appear weak. I informed them that I was ready to file for divorce as well. Immediately, the mood of the room shifted, and my mother and Catherine were visibly upset. Catherine pretended that she had been injured, accusing me of going too far with her ex-husband. I have not betrayed the family, despite her actions suggesting otherwise. They totally comprehend. I recognize that they couldn't accept the fact that I could now finally take charge of my own life. I'm ready to go on now. I no longer put up with myself for the sake of the family. If someone has never truly cared for me or respected me, I will no longer submit to them. Jason and I don't talk much anymore. He really moved out of the house and is now staying with a cousin in the area. I informed him about the dissolution of our marriage. In light of all that has transpired, nobody is even willing to discuss it. I know quite well that I have lost all faith in him. It seems impossible for me to return to the past. I was hoping that by marrying him, I would be able to start a new life with someone who appreciated me. But I now have to confront the terrible fact that this will never happen. For me, it is sufficient. I regret not breaking up with this person sooner. In all seriousness, I'm thinking of severing all contact with Catherine and my parents. As strange as that may sound, I want to keep paying them money each month. It will take time to overcome the problems caused by years of being indoctrinated to devalue myself. I attempt to believe that I don't need to visit my parents anymore for my own comfort. They're only doing it out of duty since they're getting older. At least if they die, I won't be held responsible for leaving my parents behind. As payment for my peace of mind, I agree to let them keep my money. Others would undoubtedly blame me if I cease giving money when my parents die. It hurts to realize that keeping them in my life will only cause me misery, but I understand. They may come to understand how deeply they have hurt me, but I can't wait for that day to come. I should put my pleasure first now. For the first time, I was able to have a healing moment when I spoke with Jason personally and had private chats with family members. When I informed Jason that I had made the decision to get a divorce, he left the house right away. I felt a tremendous sense of relaxation. At least I won't have to spend every day looking at a face I don't want to see. I was able to make progress in my self-recovery. Since I hadn't spoken out or made it public, my parents and Catherine carried on with their lives as if nothing had occurred. My parents continued to collect money from me, even though I was unable to take a break. Before I married Jason, some friends had advised me to draft a prenuptial agreement with an adultery provision. I am now appreciative of that. However, it is difficult to make demands on Jason because of the prenuptial agreement. The issue is that there isn't any concrete proof that he cheated. Although he worked hard to aid Catherine, there is no proof that he cheated, despite my long-standing concerns about him and her. To be honest, I don't have the energy to fight anymore. I reached my mental and physical limits. All I want to do is get a bit away from my family's poisonous environment. Perhaps he was just swayed by my mother and Catherine, and not physically unfaithful. To be honest, I'm not sure. I secretly don't want to acknowledge that he could have cheated on me. But something happened that caused me to question everything once more. Catherine's ex-husband sent me a message on social media a few days ago. I was shocked to receive a message from him because we weren't close. His message was succinct and ambiguous. Please check. To tell the truth, I was afraid to accept it. I'm worried about what he could say that I can't stand when we meet. And what if it was a bigger problem than I thought? Even though I'm trying to get well, I feel like everything is going to fall apart once more. Just in case, I've made the decision to meet him in public. I invited several of my closest friends to accompany me. I lack the bravery to handle this on my own. I'm not sure what lies ahead, but I have to find out now. I have to make this clear immediately in order to proceed. But I wasn't prepared for what he told me. I've been emotionally heartbroken ever since. Even though it's hard to put into words, I feel compelled to stand up for both myself and other people. First, after inadvertently discovering proof of an affair between Jason and Catherine, Catherine's ex-husband started to suspect something. He concluded that I had a right to know the truth after considering the situation and observing how my family treated me. He gave me a few papers. Screenshots of texts Catherine had exchanged a few months prior were included. These have to do with how much Jason had paid. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a financial deal to keep her silent, not an act of generosity or misplaced pity. In order to stop Catherine from alerting me about the affair, Jason was putting pressure on her to remain silent. I trusted my husband, but instead of protecting our relationship, he was paying my sister to keep their nasty secret. To exacerbate the situation, Catherine's ex-husband informed me that my parents had long been aware of my spouse and Catherine's affair. After a few minutes of uncertainty, everything seemed obvious to me. I felt guilty for ignoring the warning flags. I sobbed in the van for hours after learning this reality about my family's treachery. It was a huge shock. I had no idea where to begin or how to handle my parents, sister, and spouse. However, they were gravely incorrect if they believed that I could just accept this truth. I'm sick of this treatment. I came to the conclusion that I no longer needed to feel sorry for them. I had previously disregarded him since there wasn't enough proof to proceed. But now that I have concrete evidence, I plan to do all in my power to prevent him from getting away. He didn't have many rights at first because of the prenuptial agreement, but now I want him to be accountable for his behavior. I've gotten in a lot of trouble since I met Catherine's ex-husband. I've been having trouble eating and sleeping. It wasn't an easy path because my family and soon-to-be ex-husband betrayed me. But I've been figuring things out gradually. I first made the decision to sever all financial relations with my parents. I no longer pay their expenses, give them money, or feel responsible for their behavior. I can't have any more expectations of them in light of what I've learnt. Naturally, this did not sit well with them. This revelation was particularly difficult for Catherine and my mother to accept. After that, I received letters and emails from them. I called the cops as soon as they refused to back down. My attorney moved quickly to apply for a restraining order. They are now legally prohibited from approaching or contacting me. They haven't released anything to the public yet. They appear to have finally realized that I may ruin their life much more if they attempt to get in touch with me again. They already experience severe humiliation as a result of the restraining order, and they are ashamed for others to know. Let's hope that keeps up. I don't have enough solid proof to stop Jason from prolonging several processes. I won't give in this time, even though he's probably expecting that by taking his time, I'll become weary and make a concession. It is no longer an option to ignore it. I can't allow things to remain the same in light of what he has done. Even though I'm worn out, I maintain my determination by thinking about how he deceived and betrayed me every day. Despite feeling overburdened, I've been rediscovering interests and pastimes that keep me entertained, with the help of a few old pals. Even though there are bad days and it's never easy, I keep pushing myself to get out of this challenging circumstance. The road this year has been lengthy and difficult, but in the end, I was able to win because of the prenuptial agreement and proof of his adultery. Jason briefly appeared to lament what he had lost, but those sentiments soon vanished as he thought back on the previous falsehoods and betrayals. When I last heard from Jason, he was working many jobs and engrossed in his work in an attempt to heal. I believed at the moment that I would never fully heal from such a profound betrayal. However, I've been living ever since, cherishing my emotions. It goes without saying that therapy changed my life by teaching me how to set limits, recognize negative behaviors, and put my health first. I was able to rediscover what makes me happy as a result.
When I was 18, I was expelled from my household. First, I was in dire need of some guidance. I considered my family to be perfect. Before I was born, my parents battled for 4 years to conceive. My mother became pregnant just as they were ready to give up, which was a family miracle. According to what I've been told, my parents were overjoyed to hear that I had been born and had a lot of plans for the future. Nevertheless, my grandma informed me that this joy was short-lived. My parents secretly disapproved of one another. They were often having heated arguments, and even when my mother got pregnant, they were still fighting daily over the same topics. My father criticized her for continuing to consume alcohol throughout the day, even when pregnant, while my mother vehemently denounced his gambling habit. In exchange for my mother quitting drinking, my father agreed to give up gambling. At first, my mother accepted this suggestion, but she eventually betrayed her word. My father found out that my mother was still drinking and covertly storing bottles of alcohol about the home. My father issued my mother an ultimatum. She had to quit drinking or risk divorce, since he felt that her drinking was hurting not just him but also me. That my mother wouldn't give up her alcohol. My grandmother claims that my mother became so enraged by the circumstances that she flung a pair of scissors at my father and yelled insults at him. My father had to be brought to the hospital after suffering an eye injury as a result. Fortunately, the doctor was able to heal the partial tear in the cornea, preventing him from losing all of his eyesight. My mother was so terrified by this episode that she humbly begged my father's pardon. My mother vowed to change, so my father decided not to sue her or make a big deal out of the issue. I've heard that my parents were thrilled to have me and worked extremely hard to raise me. My grandma claims that my parents did not experience this tranquility for very long. When my father got home from work one day, he discovered me sobbing aloud in the kids' room. My mother, meanwhile, fell out drunk on the couch. My father grew really enraged upon witnessing this event and went up to my mother. He placed the responsibility on the circumstance, but my mother justified herself by claiming that she had just had a small drink and that the burden of parenting was too much. My father thought about calling Child Protective Services at the time, but decided against it. I believe that if he had reported it at that time, things would have turned out better. After that, my mother behaved a little differently, although it was only to better conceal it. My mother would make sure it was unnoticeable by drinking and sleeping until the evening after my father departed for work in the morning. I must have been hungry for several days. My health progressively declined as a result, and I noticeably lost weight. The floor was filthy, sticky, and unhygienic, and there were heaps of unwashed dishes in the sink when my grandma came to visit. My clothing and diapers were filthy, and my hair was disheveled when my grandma saw me. When my mother was informed by my grandmother about the condition of the house and me, she became protective and said, "Don't interfere in my business." In addition, my grandma saw that my mother was obviously intoxicated during the day when she visited on another occasion. My mother was unable to react appropriately to my grandmother's confrontation and continued to laugh and talk incoherently. My mother then publicly expressed her rage while adamantly claiming it was nothing. My grandma stayed at the home all day to look after me because she felt she could not leave things the way they were at that point. My grandma asked if she might watch me for a time when my father got home from work. My mother needed time to check herself into a rehabilitation center. Despite my mother's objections, my father promptly accepted my grandmother's proposal. My father believed that additional help was required in the home, while my mother was receiving treatment, so I believe he agreed with what my grandma had to say. As a result, I spent many months living with my grandma. The time I spent with my grandmother was priceless and really joyful. She read me stories before bed every day and gave me a bath. She also brought me to the park and prepared delectable dinners. That's when I first realized that parents should do these things for their kids. Unlike my mother, my grandma never shouted or became upset when I wanted to play. My grandma gently reprimanded me instead of hitting me when I damaged a plate by mistake. I was able to feel totally at peace throughout the valuable period I spent living with my grandma. My grandma gradually took on the role of mother to me, and she has been a valued source of support ever since. I can only be sincerely appreciative to my granny. Without her, I don't know how I would have made it through those trying times. My father also took the time to come see me frequently. Ever since, he eagerly anticipated seeing me. In addition, my mother frequently told me how much she wished to see me and how she hoped to be well soon so she could give me another hug. I must admit that I was a little reluctant to go back to my parents' house. If it was feasible, I wanted to live with my grandma indefinitely. But after a few months, my mother was able to quit drinking and received her AA sobriety chip. She drove to my grandmother's place to visit me as her first action. I felt as though I was meeting a stranger when I finally saw my mother after being apart for several months. She appeared to be in better health. She talked to my grandmother about it, and she informed me that no matter how much I sobbed or fought, I would go back to my parents' house. I am your real parent, and we must live together, my mother urged. It was really difficult for me to go back to my parents' house since it brought back a lot of bad memories. My body and mind looked to be under a lot of strain from the relocation. Even though I was just 5 years old, I had days of nausea and appetite loss. I thus received a diagnosis of an eating problem. After that, my parents went to great lengths to support me by going to family therapy. We moved forward after gradually overcoming our prior suffering. My emotions steadied with time, and my heart felt at peace again. My parents no longer fought as much as they used to. They both made an effort to cherish their family time, and my mother gave up drinking entirely. My mother started working on improving as a parent and establishing a fresh, trustworthy bond with my father. In order to spend more time with us, my father also cut back on his work hours. But one afternoon while my father and I were coming home from school, we came upon an unexpected scenario. Inside the house, my mother was having an intimate relationship with an unidentified man. We saw everything firsthand, and it turned into another major difficulty for our family. Their misbehavior was evident to us, as were their behaviors. I was in a state of profound shock at the time, and my father was momentarily speechless. My father's cheeks flushed with shame as my mother and her boyfriend attempted to conceal in a panic. While he was telling me to go upstairs, he confronted my mother and her lover. The lover fled from the house in terror. We could hear my parents having a heated argument from inside the home. Self-centered, my mother justified her adultery by telling my father that she was disturbed by the expectation to be flawless and that being with her lover helped her feel normal. She also told my father that she always thought he would be let down, regardless of what she did. My father instructed her to leave the house right away after calling her a coward. My mother frantically begged my father to stop being so nasty at that very moment. For my benefit, she said they ought to mend their marriage. My grandma arrived to get me that night when my parents were having a heated argument. She spoke to my mother a little, but she didn't really get involved. I spent the following 2 weeks at my grandmother's place as my parents worked out their differences at home. My mom was quite worried about me and phoned me every day. In hindsight, I see she was just thinking about herself and not anyone else. I'm not sure if my father genuinely loved my mother or if he had just grown too used to a tumultuous relationship. Albeit in the end, he made the decision to live with her again, albeit with certain restrictions. I could no longer view my mother the way I had previously, even if my father had decided that they should go through marriage therapy. I thought I no longer respected her at all after seeing her with another man. For us, it was the worst scenario imaginable. 3 months later, my father received a stomach cancer diagnosis. He passed out at work one day after complaining of excruciating stomach ache. After that, he was brought to the hospital, where it was discovered that his health was fast declining and that he needed to start treatment right once. My father so started a life of forced rest and treatment. He was compelled to fight cancer and took time off from work. My mother was unhappy even though my grandma voluntarily assisted her and my father had some funds. She was often complaining about the financial strain and the expense of the treatment. It enforced. My father suggested that she look for a part-time job and assured her that he would go back to work and provide for her when he recovered. My mother's alternatives were restricted, so she began working as a server at a nearby restaurant. She worked late into the night because of the long hours required for the job. My grandma took my father to and from the hospital at this time. I was offered a ride to school every day by the kid of my next-door neighbor, who was around my age. It was quite beneficial to us. Sean, who lived in the house next door, and I grew close as a result. Sean's parents were familiar with my family because we had been friends for a long time and were virtually raised together. Sean's parents began asking me over for lunch and supper because my parents used to fight a lot. Neither my father nor I had any issues with Sean and I becoming buddies. But every time I spent too much time at their place, my mother reprimanded me, claiming they treated me like a broken toy and a charity case. She may have been right in hindsight, but the more time I spent with them, the more I came to understand that they regarded me like a member of their family. Sean's mother even made it a point to prepare me an apple pie every weekend once she found out how much I enjoyed them. I learned how to play basketball from Sean's dad, and we practiced outside their garage late at night. They eventually became to be like a second family to me. Therefore, when Sean and I began dating, nobody was surprised. Sean gradually brought a lot of amazing things into my life, and I am thankful every day that he has persevered through so many difficulties and is still my boyfriend. My mother has never really trusted Sean or his family, which is terrible because I come from a complicated background. Despite my mother's distress, Sean and his family offered me love and sympathy. My father's cancer struggle started a year ago, and the doctors informed him that he had a limited amount of time left because the treatment was no longer working. Our family was really taken aback by this news. I recall sobbing all night long while thinking about my father since I was still a little child. I was unable to comprehend why I had to lose the one parent who truly loved me. Accepting the loss was really hard. My father tried to spend as much time with our family as he could in his final months. I knew something wasn't right when my father didn't wake up one morning despite my repeated calls. My mother contacted 911 after I promptly told her. The anguish I experienced when the paramedics declared his dead was beyond description. The fact that my father had died quietly while sleeping was the only minor consolation. I was so distraught that I kept screaming and resisted their attempts to remove my father's body until my mother eventually had me restrained. I felt a little more at ease when my grandma showed up. I was unable to really understand the extent of her anguish at the moment. Everything went well at the burial, but when the lawyer arrived to read my father's will, I was truly taken aback. Then it came to light that I was the sole heir to my father's estate. This revelation shocked my mother, who requested the lawyer to check the paperwork. After the treatment, my father left the house and some assets to me, probably so that I could start over, because he recognized the type of person my mother was. My mother, however, was not persuaded and kept asking the attorney if there was a way to legally contest that the house was hers because she was the wife. However, there was no legal doubt over my father's mental health because he had officially changed his name a long time ago, and my mother's claim lacked merit. I told my mother that I wanted to stay in the house when she inquired what I planned to do with it. In order to move to a better location, my mother recommended selling the house. I turned down her offer, though, because I had recently lost my father and the house was the only place I could sense his presence. My mother ultimately had few choices and stayed in the house. My mother appeared to be somewhat disappointed at the moment, but I didn't give it much thought. But 2 months later, my mother told me that she was in love with a man named Kevin. She had an affair with him years prior. My mother's desire to meet him really irritated me. After many years, my mother stated she had reconnected with Kevin and began to refer to him as an old friend. I thought my mother was lying to me all the time after my father passed away. Seeing them kiss each other made me feel even more anxious because they were so near. I was considerably more troubled by this experience. I was even more upset when I recalled the evenings when my mother came home late. My mother had previously been my ideal role model. I was offended by her remarks, though, and told her that he wasn't needed in my life, that she should move out if she planned to get married, and that living alone would be preferable to living with a guy she had an affair with when my father was still living. Using the excuse that I was still a juvenile and had no other choices, my mother threatened me. Sadly, she was correct, and I was powerless. She eventually got married to Kevin. Furthermore, Kevin's child was going to be born to my mother. He was very controlling and would phone my mother every time she completed work, and he would call again if she was even a minute late getting home, as if that wasn't cause enough for me to despise him. I swiftly turned down his attempt to do the same to me. I explained to him that he is not my biological father and that I am free to travel wherever I choose. He can't lock me out, by the way, because I have the home keys. My mother hadn't done anything extra for me by now. My sole parent's lack of concern for me made me feel a little depressed. But until I graduated, Sean's parents and my grandma helped and encouraged me. Later, while I was getting ready to go a party with friends, my mother came to my room and told me that I should be more responsible for the house now that I was an adult. I had considered and applied to college on my own, and I always cleaned my own belongings. I asked my mother, perplexed, what she meant. At the end, I was able to enroll at a respectable local institution, saving me money on travel expenses. But in order to make the journey to school easier, I decided to get a car. I considered asking my mother for assistance in purchasing a car. But as soon as I mentioned it, she and Kevin grew enraged. Kevin said that because they both had low incomes, I already received too much help from them. In addition, my ambitions to purchase a car were thwarted when my mother and Kevin began remodeling the house on their own. I sat there silently at this period, saying nothing. Sean saw my frustration at the Kevin scenario. He advised Kevin to think about his obligations as a father. Then Kevin made the decision to turn my room into a room for their unborn child. I was dumbfounded when he persisted in telling me that I ought to leave and begin living alone. My mother and Kevin informed me that they could no longer allow me to reside in the house. I should go out, pay my rent, and live on my own, my mother remarked. They ordered me out of the house a few hours later. To find out my legal rights, I went to see a lawyer. The attorney advised me to serve a formal eviction notice after confirming that my father's will was quite explicit and outlining my mother's and Kevin's lack of authority over the residence. I brought my grandma to face my mother and Kevin after receiving the notification. Despite her little stature, my grandma was not at all scared by towering Kevin. Gazing at him, she said that she had made the decision to sell the house and gave them a 30-day notice to leave. They were unable to argue after seeing the warning. I gave them the lawyer's signed notice, stressing the need to comply with the 30-day time frame and outlining the legal repercussions for noncompliance. Kevin grabbed the page from me, his face flushed with rage. Despite my mother encouraging me to fend for myself as a youngster, I kept my own and informed her about the years she had drowned in drink. I advised her that she should be the one to be self-sufficient. My mother pleaded with me to let her remain since she had nowhere else to go, but I informed her firmly that I would no longer allow them to behave as they wanted. My grandma and I were also informed that we would remain in the house and make sure they left within 30 days. Unprepared for this, Kevin and my mother attempted to debate, but I refused to back down. I reminded them that they were only visitors and that I was the house's owner. I would have all of their possessions taken to a hotel if they refused to do as I said. I followed my lawyer's advice and chose a 30-day grace period to make sure they couldn't sue me if this matter got to court. In order to be fair while selling the property, I also mentioned that I was prepared to reimburse the expenses related to the renovations provided they could produce the proper invoices that had been approved by a lawyer. My grandmother and I stayed there with my mother and Kevin in order to keep them from refusing to leave or from unlawfully occupying the property without a good reason, according to the explanation given by others. I ultimately outwitted them by relocating all of their possessions to the porch and locked them out of the house after the 30-day legal notice had passed. When they phoned the police after my mother's ultrasound, they were unable to intervene. I told them that neither Kevin nor my mother even had the house's keys, and I composedly displayed the papers that proved I was the house's legitimate owner. The cops confirmed this and indicated they may appear in court if they wanted to. Kevin angrily attacked me and refuted my arguments. Then, shouting loudly, he started to leave. He was informed by one of the cops that he posed a threat to me. Kevin and my mother were eventually taken into custody. Being able to keep them off my land and explain this to them made me very happy. I then put up security cameras across the entire property. House viewings were scheduled to begin the next week after a meeting with the real estate agent. Later, through friends and family, my mother and Kevin made many attempts to get in touch with me to apologize, but I consistently ignored their messages. I had heard that they were residing in an apartment on the opposite side of the city after being apprehended by the police. My mother made many attempts to make amends with me, even after the baby was born. "I want you to meet the baby," she said in texts that included pictures of the child. But I could see she was acting strategically. As advised by my grandma, I chose not to reply to any correspondence from Kevin or my mother. I had to cut all ties with them in order to go on in my new life since their presence was a source of old anguish. I was able to get money for my new life and university fees because the house sold for more than I had anticipated. My search for a new place was aided by Sean's parents. I just learned that my mother has been battling alcoholism once more. Additionally, it doesn't appear like she and Kevin are getting along. But to be honest, I don't care about it anymore. After my father passed away, my mother made her own decisions, and I don't blame her for them. I'm currently taking Sean seriously and working hard every day to achieve my goals. On the weekends, I assist with gardening and cook at my grandmother's house. This is how I define family now. Even though my connection with my mother ended, I believe it was the beginning of something new. My father comes to mind occasionally. He left me the house, I think, so I could reclaim my life. I keep going in the hopes of granting his dream.